And I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully I don't lose internet. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So, okay, can everyone see my screen and see the slides? If anyone's texting me, I can't see because I'm not.
I can see it, Caroline.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Okay, so I have several of my colleagues on the line as well. And so the way we're going to handle this, because we usually get a lot of questions, is if you could put your questions in the chat box. I'm going to go through a presentation that answers like the most common questions we get. And when I'm done with the presentation, we can go through the questions that have been put in the chat box, okay? So again, welcome. And I'm going to talk today about the Conservation Innovation Grants Program, CIG Classic program. So the CIG program basically has two national competitions. The other competition, on-farm trials, we did a webinar on that 2 weeks ago. So if you're interested in that NFO, please look on our website for that recording. So I'm going to talk today, I'm going to give you a general overview. I'm going to talk about how to apply, talk about some other resources. I'll briefly go over the CIG priorities. As well, I'm going to talk specifically about the historically underserved set-aside we have. And I'll touch on the changes to the NFO from past years, as well as any pre-registration requirements there are. So the purpose of the CIG program is to stimulate the development and adoption of innovative conservation approaches and technologies on farms, ranches, and forest lands. So what this translates to basically is pilot and demonstration projects, sometimes field research projects. That's predominantly what we fund with the CIG Classic program. We have about $15 million available this year to spend. It's the same amount of money we had last year. And last year we were able to make 19 awards. So we received only 67 proposals last year. That was a little bit low for us. We normally receive about 100 proposals, but we're normally in that funding area between like 20 and 25% funding rate. So it's a little easier to get a grant with us than some of the other federal granting programs. As well, this year, the maximum ask is going to be $2 million federal dollars. And we also have a minimum for this program because we want, large, impactful projects. So the minimum is $300,000. So you have to ask for at least $300,000 federal dollars. And if you have a smaller project, we really direct you to the CIG state programs. As well, the CIG Classic program is open to all non-federal entities and individuals in the United States. So if you're a federal worker, unfortunately, you cannot apply. Some of the essentials of the program is you can find the application package in the notice of funding on the grants.gov website. If you're not familiar with that, that is a clearinghouse for federal grants. And you can quickly search for it using this opportunity number I have on the slide. Actually, if you just use the last part of that, you should be able to search pretty quickly. In addition, application submissions will be through grants.gov. So last year we tried a new portal. We're not going to be doing that this year. We're going to use the traditional way of just our applicants to submit their proposals through grants.gov. Often people ask us if they can send their submission through email, and the answer is no, you cannot. We only accept them through grants.gov. The application deadline is Tuesday, October 11th. So you still have a good almost 7 full weeks left to get an application together. So we hope to see your application. You have almost until midnight that day to submit your application online. So this year we have just 3 funding priorities. Historically, our priority areas are natural resource concerns like water quality or, you know, on-farm energy, things like that. But our priorities this year are pretty broad, so we actually only have 3. We have climate smart agriculture, combating invasive species, and conservation in urban ag systems. And most of these, someone is not muting their speaker, so if everyone could please mute. So all of these areas, they really will accept natural resource concerns almost across the board. You know, they're looking at forestry systems, ag systems, horticulture systems, pasture lands, as well. You know, water quality will fit into most of them, can tie into it. Energy can fit into some of them, but basically they're all pretty broad this year. If you decide to address more than one priority, you will need to select a main priority. For instance, if you have, if you're going to be looking at an invasive species that is expanding its range because of climate change, we want you to choose which priority area you want to submit, because we have different panels for each of these priority areas, and we can only panel your proposal once. So although our program is open to all individuals and entities except for federal government agency workers, there are some other eligibility issues that everyone should be aware of. The main one is that our program requires non-federal matching funds or cash. It can be cash or in kind. So most of the projects are going to be required to bring forward at least 50% of match. Now, if you qualify as a historically underserved group for the historically underserved set aside, if you qualify for the set aside, there is actually a different match requirement, but 90% of our projects are not going to qualify. So for most of you, there's a lot of match that you have to get together before. And I think this is one of the most difficult parts of our program. So if you have any questions on this beyond what I go into today, feel free to email us. But the most important thing to be aware of is you have to have your commitments clear on match at the time you submit your proposal. So if you are working with partner organizations that are bringing forward this commitment, this match commitment for you, you're going to need signed letters that clearly state what that match is going to be from those organizations. So if your organization is not providing it, you will need signed letters from organizations that are. And this includes producers. So let's say you want to include, 10 producers in your project, and their work time is going to count as match. You will need signed letters from those individual producers, or you will need a signed letter from an organization that can represent them. Okay, so each project also must present an innovation. This may seem really obvious, but we actually get a lot of proposals that are not clearly innovative. We define in our NFO what is innovative. Sometimes it's just about moving an idea that's used in one part of the country to a new part of the country. So it's not always necessarily a brand new technology. So I encourage you to read that detail in our NFO. As well, a really important eligibility requirement is each project must involve equip producers, I should say. I say here equip farmers, but basically equip eligible producers need to be involved in each project. They don't have to be, the project does not have to be on their land, but they do have to be involved. Some projects will include them with surveys. Other projects often just do like a workshop, but you have to have a way to confirm that you have equip eligible producers. I want to talk really quickly about our historically underserved set aside, because I think sometimes there's confusion on this. At least 10% of our awarded funding or projects are going to be to qualifying historically underserved groups. And you have to, if you're going to apply for this set aside, you're going to need to mark that, identify that on the required cover sheet for our application. In addition, we have criteria. If you're going to apply for this set aside, there's additional criteria for the HU set aside, which will allow us to basically assess if you're actually meeting the needs of a historically underserved group. And there's 4 different groups that will qualify for this set aside. Most of them are HU producers or HU organizations, but if your organization is not a historically underserved group, they could still qualify if they're meeting, if 100% of the producers involved are historically underserved, or if they're meeting a certain need for a historically underserved group and 100% of that project is focused on that. For groups that qualify for the historically underserved set aside, they are allowed a reduced match of just 33% of the total project budget. So, so if you were, for instance, asking for about $500,000 in federal funds, that would be only $250,000 worth of matching funds that would need to go into the project. In addition, just this year, historically underserved groups that provide a justification can actually have their match completely waived. Now, if you're not applying for the historically underserved set aside, we like to encourage groups to always include historically underserved groups in their proposal, even if they're not applying for the set aside. So I've actually already gone through all of our changes and updates. We have new priorities every year for the CIG Classic program changes their priority areas. In addition, this year we have a waiver for historically underserved groups if they are not able to meet the match requirement. As well, this year, the start date is later than other years. We ask people to give a start date of around May 1st, 2023, because it takes us that long basically to get through the grant funding process. I also want to bring to people's attention that for I want to bring to everyone's attention that you need a unique entity identifier number in order to submit your application. So this is new this year. Historically, people had to apply for a DUNS number, but you're going to need to get this in order to apply. It can take a long time. We ask that you, as soon as you know you want to apply for this opportunity, to make sure you go into sam.gov and register so you can get this number. It can take easily 3 weeks to get the number, so we actually encourage you to go in right away. If for some reason you're not able to get the number because of something that is on the fault of sam.gov, and you've given it a lot of time, like at least 3 weeks, then let us know. If you have proof that it is a sam.gov error, we will work with you to get your application in. But you'll want to make sure you're communicating with them and you're communicating with us way before the deadline for the application. A few project narrative hints. They may seem pretty obvious, but I like to go over them because we actually see these problems with our proposals every year. Make sure you are clear as to what your innovation is, so the review panel isn't have to ask that question. A lot of times people kind of have multiple ideas and they're not very direct on the way they talk about their innovation, and the panel can get confused as to what you really want them to focus on and rate as the most important part of that innovation. Be sure your goals and objectives are clear. Goals and objectives are not the same thing. A lot of applicants will use those words interchangeably. In general, most of these proposals should have one goal, And the objectives should be informing that goal. So most projects will have like 4 or 5 objectives and 1 goal, and the objectives should fall out of that goal. So your objectives should not change throughout the document. And believe it or not, we've seen that multiple times. Be sure to clearly define your project's potential impact and their deliverables. And those are 2 different things. This is also something that often gets intertwined in proposal writing. So we'll want to know what the potential long-term impacts of your project are going to be. And this is really for the panel to understand the scalability of your idea, or the potential scalability. A lot of times long-term impacts are not actually realized during the life of the award, but we're going to want to know what that is when we assess this proposal. So making some sort of justified estimations can be helpful. But that's really different from the tangible materials at the end of the project. So what is this project going to deliver? You know, are you going to produce publications? What are the measurements that are going to be made? What's the actual end product from this project? So you want to be really clear about both of these items, and you want to make sure that they don't overlap, that they're distinct aspects. If your project is part of a larger initiative you're involved in, sometimes organizations or university groups, they have overall ideas they're working on, and they try to find multiple funding sources from that. When you speak in your proposal, you're going to want to really make a clear distinction between what this NRCS project will fund and then how it's going to feed a larger initiative. And that larger initiative should be addressed in the background section, but it shouldn't be necessarily seeping into the other parts of the narrative, like the methodology. As well, always check your document for grammar and basic structure. Believe it or not, we've received proposals that are still in track changes. Panelists notice things like spelling errors. When a proposal hasn't been well edited, it's noticeable. Every proposal has a few errors, but when there's multiple on each page, it can work against a proposal. As well, we kind of require a little bit more, I think, than other federal agencies for our budget and our budget narrative, what we want to see. We ask for a spreadsheet in addition to the actual written budget narrative. That way, it basically helps in the award phase, but it helps the project teams add up their stuff. So basically, we want to see that Excel spreadsheet as well. But in the budget narrative, make sure you don't embed figures and tables, because when we have to remove those, we can't actually put those into the agreement. It becomes real messy. So keep those figures and tables in the spreadsheet. As well, the budget narrative is not the proposal narrative. So don't explain the project in it. Don't talk about methods or objectives. Just explain the costs. Stick to the costs. Costs should be separated by year. As well, you should be rounding to the nearest dollar. You don't need to give cents. As well, keep in mind the budget is an estimate. That's understood. There can be small adjustments if you end up getting an award. So what's more important is that your budget narrative adds up properly, because if you're way off on these calculations, that gets noticed. As well, make sure you use the major categories that are on the SF424A form. That's like personnel, fringe, supplies. Those would be the major categories. So your line items would line up under those. Many organizations have their own major category line items, but make sure you use the SF424As. Okay, and with that, I can start taking questions. You'll notice here I have up here the NRCS CIG inbox. So if we don't get to your question today, feel free to email us as well. I'm going to amend our frequently asked questions document, and any questions we don't get to, we'll add to that as well, and repost that soon. Okay, Havala?
Hey, Caroline. All right, we have a number in the chat. I'm going to turn on my camera briefly just so I'm not a disembodied voice, and I'll turn myself right back off. So the first question is, even though federal employees cannot be the applicant, can any funding at all go to federal employees such as ARS employees?
No, no funding can go to ARS employees. I'm sorry. ARS employees can lend their expertise to a project, but it cannot be counted as any of the non-federal, and it cannot be and they cannot get any money from the federal. When you look at federal regulations on grants, actually they usually they're very specific when you can fund federal employees. So, and you can't for CIG, unfortunately.
All right, thanks, Caroline. Trying to group more or less by subject. And so I think you've answered the second question, which is, although federal agencies cannot apply, can they collaborate without getting funding?
Yes, they can. They can definitely collaborate. A lot of times they'll write like a support letter because you can't write a commitment letter.
Great. And the next question is kind of parsing that out a little more still. Can a county apply and have Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, private landowners, and ranchers as partners?
Yes, yes, and yes. So in terms of government, only federal government cannot apply, right? Because this is federal government money. But state government, tribal government, county government, all those governments can apply.
Okay, questions are coming in somewhat faster now. So this is great. Can publicly traded companies, so for-profit companies, apply for the grant?
Yes.
Great. I think that's a pretty straightforward yes or no. And so can you describe EQIP eligibility? What does that mean?
Okay. EQIP eligibility is that you're a producer in charge of some land, and I don't know, Heavily, you might be able to help me with this, or I can pull it up. It's pretty loose. You only have to meet the first three requirements, actually. So it's
Yeah, you pretty much
yeah.
have got it, right? So the first three components are defined in CFR as, compliant with highly erodible land and wetland compliance provisions of the Farm Bill. So basically, don't mess up the wetlands on your site. You must be a producer as defined by NRCS. And so really any of those applicant types, if you are involving people who are producing something, right, some sort of agricultural product, that will more or less do for us. And then have control of the land. The language in CFR is for the term of the contract. For this purposes, it's for the term of the grant. But basically, you are able to do stuff on your land. So Caroline's right. It is pretty loose. As long as some agricultural production is happening. Caroline, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing that kind of trips up some people is there's an AGI requirement. So because we're NRCS, we kind of fall under requirements other grants don't have. So if you're a producer and you're functioning as a producer in the project, the AGI requirement is you can't be getting more than $900,000 from the federal government. So that could limit the amount of money that producer is getting if they're doing like a trial as a producer in the project.
Okay.
And
Great.
that's different than if they're the applicant. They can apply for the grant.
So teasing this out a little bit more, to be EQIP eligible for the purposes of this program, do you need to be an EQIP contract holder, approved for EQIP by NRCS, or do you just need to fall within the eligibility criteria?
You just need to fall within the eligibility criteria. So we don't actually check EQIP eligibility. NRCS doesn't. It's the responsibility of the awardee to make sure they're, the farmers they're working with are EQIP eligible. And so sometimes they just have them sign a form, especially if they're just in a workshop.
Great. All right. So how do you define a pilot project? Is this opportunity viewed similarly to a seed grant to obtain preliminary data?
I would say no. So this program is not about preliminary data, but it's how you define preliminary data. So we're looking for projects that have brought some sort of data to the table to start, right? And they're furthering that question, usually in like some sort of field trial. So this is very loose and it's subject to interpretation, is all I can say. It doesn't have to be a field trial, but there has to be some level of assurance that this isn't like a super high risk project. You know, it can't be a new hypothesis, basically. So it depends how you're defining preliminary data.
All right, great. Sorry, capturing just a couple more questions here. Companies, okay, is it natural for applicants to CIG Classic to later apply for on-farm trials? What's the relationship between those programs?
Okay, yes, it is actually. I think that's ideally how it's set up. So I think CIG Classic is really focused on testing new innovations, right? On-farm trials is really about scaling those innovations. So if you have some data that shows an innovation is effective, this is like the normal way a project kind of would progress. Let's say you have an app that you've been building, you want to test it in the field. You get a CIG Classic project. It tests well and maybe, you know, 2 or 3 farms. And then you would apply to on-farm trials to really scale that to multiple states or multiple soil types, something like that. There are other significant differences between these two programs, because on-farm trials is about scalability. It's really there's a component where farmer incentive payments are required. A project submitted to on-farm trials, they're not going to accept a proposal that only is using one farm. Like, producers have to be involved in those projects and they have to be using their land. They have to be EQIP eligible farmers that are getting an incentive payment, because the intent behind that program is really to decrease the risk for the farmer to try innovative conservation practices. And basically the government wanted data on those innovative conservation practices and how they impact a large area, right? So there is an evaluation component. The problem with on-farm trials, though, for many of our applicants is you're not allowed to use the federal funding for indirect costs. So that is problematic. Now for CIG Classic, it's a little more of a traditional grant program where you can apply indirect costs and you don't have to have on-farm trials, basically. You could be asking a different question that can have impact on conservation, and you can be testing it different ways.
Great. Still coming in fast. Is there a minimum number of, I think you kind of addressed this in your last answer, but is there a minimum number of sites that you have to have a project on?
For CIG Classic, the answer is no. And for on-farm trials, I'll bring that program up just because we already talked about it. You have to have more than one site. So for the program I'm focused on, the answer is no.
And do the projects have to be multi-state, nationwide, or can they happen in just one state?
They can happen in just one state. They have to be impactful though, right? So if you've got an idea that's only going to be relevant to like one county, it probably won't be competitive. You could still apply, but you know, you're going to want to get some clarification as to how much impact it can have. And usually if it's even within a state, that's pretty impactful.
Right. For the purposes of this NFO, how does NRCS define HU producers?
So we have there's 4 different HU producer groups that are identified on our website. There's minority farmers, veteran farmers, beginning farmers and ranchers, and then there's one more group, I don't remember. But I think what's most important is women are not identified by NRCS as an HU group. So I think that's the one that trips people up a lot. But go to our website and it's very clearly outlined which groups are minority farmers or are HU farmers. So,
Caroline, will a spreadsheet template be provided for the budget?
yes, a spreadsheet template is already available on the grants.gov website.
Is there a list of federal or state organizations that are looking to match grant recipients?
We don't provide that type of information.
More budget questions. Do real estate costs qualify as non-federal costs if you purchase the real estate for the project in calculating match? So can you use already purchased real estate to provide match?
I don't believe that qualifies. Match items have to, also fall under 2 CFR 200 regulations, and land purchase is not allowable.
Can 2022 grant awards from other entities, including federal, count as match? Our 3-year project just received some significant grants from BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, among others.
No. Other federal grants cannot count as match except for the REPI program. I think there is one, I think it's an Army program or a Department of Defense program that has a clause in it that it's allowed to be used as match, but pretty much all the rest, it's a clear no. You cannot apply those federal grants to this award as match. You can apply things like, I think most common, just personnel costs. I think that's the most common. As well, if you have like an event and you're involving partner organizations, their time at the event, their travel costs, things like that are often used, and in kind can be used as well.
So I think you answered that the next question, which is, can match be in kind?
Yes, 100% of your match can be in kind. There's no cash in kind differentiation.
Great. May not have the answer to this one, but does NRCS have a program or grant for pilot projects, since this program is not a pilot project per se?
Well, I guess I would disagree, but we do a lot of pilot projects, but they come forward with I guess it's how you define it. They come forward with information that lends credibility to the success of the project.
I think the question was about outside other NRCS sources of funding for projects like that, and I'm not sure that I know of anything.
NRCS doesn't have a lot of grant programs. You really probably need to look to some of the other granting institutions like NIFA or NSF or things like that.
Can you revisit the budget requirements again, specifically matching? So if a project is requesting $300 in federal funding, is that $300,000 in match?
Yes, it's 50% of the total budget. At least 50% of the total budget has to be matched. So yes, if you're asking for $300,000 of federal money, you would need at least $300,000 of match.
Are producer incentive payments a requirement of CIG Classic applications?
They are not. They are not a requirement of CIG Classic.
There's a question from Dallas Smales asking about funding opportunities for invasive annual management on reservations. I think we might want to take that one offline one-on-one, unless you want to talk about it here.
Yeah, I don't think I'll talk about specific questions in regards to ideas people have in terms of what they want to submit. I'll take all those offline.
Yep. Do email us at nrcssig@usda.gov if you have kind of, one-off questions that don't neatly fit in the chat here. Oh boy, there are even more. All right. So you mentioned forestry applications as part of the SIG. Would urban forestry and woodlots with potential production ideas qualify, like urban farming but focused on urban forestry?
Yeah, that would qualify. It's specific. Urban forestry is specifically called out in the urban ag priority area.
Can CIG Classic funding be used for the U.S. portion of an international project?
Yes, sure. I mean, as long as the funding source you're working for with internationally accepts it.
Are youth considered beginning or new farmers? What if they come from a farming background with their family?
I don't know how that's defined. Again, a producer is usually someone who has control over the land. So if they, if they're not making the decisions on the land, I don't think they would be considered a beginning farmer. But NRCS is a little bit more flexible with that term than other agencies, where for beginning farmer and ranchers, it's up to 10 years, I believe, that you would qualify as a beginning farmer or rancher. So producers that have only worked the land for maybe, 9 years would still qualify.
Yeah, and I think backing up, youth are not considered to be historically underserved by NRCS in and of themselves.
Yeah.
All right. Can reimbursements or match cover work starting at the beginning of 2023? So I'm guessing that means before the award is finalized.
No, you should not plan on that. You cannot. You should plan on costs starting May 1st, basically, and not before.
All right. So let's see. Where do we get the in-kind rates for services rendered? For example, volunteer hours for field workers versus equipment operators and admin staff.
They should be justifiable, but they're going to vary based on different people's area or region of the country. So, you have to have a method for selecting those rates that is justifiable, be it the minimum wage in your town, or if you go to like an extension office, sometimes they have the going rate for someone who would work someone else's property. As well, NRCS has a lot of fee structures for their conservation practices, so you can check their offices too. But yeah, we don't provide those, the program. You have to come up with those, but whatever rate you use, it has to be justifiable. It's usually a going rate for your area.
Can unrecovered indirect costs be used as match? Example of negotiated rate is 45%. Can the difference between 45% and 10% indirect cost rate be used as match?
Yes, it can.
And I think that was the end of the questions I saw in the chat. Folks, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to add them. And if I have not asked your question, that means that I missed it or thought it was duplicative, so please resubmit. We have one more. How are subawards handled?
So subawards, basically you just write them in. Usually you would need a support letter, so the panel knows this group has interest in being involved in the project. I think that's the only thing that sometimes comes up is people include a subawardee and they don't have a letter from them. But subawards are, they basically have the same requirements as the awardee. So, they're all subject to the federal guidelines. So yeah, just add them to the budget if you're gonna, oh, and they go in the other section of the budget. I guess that's the other thing. There's a category called other, and that's where subawards should sit. Hopefully that answers the questions.
A couple more questions about subawards. I think we have a few folks who may have missed the questions about ARS or federal employees. So we might want to reiterate that one more time, which is that no federal employees may not receive any funding under these grants, even as subawardees. Okay. Judith asks, subawardees are contracts in the overall budget or other and not contract?
So a subaward is not is not in the contract section of a budget. A contract is viewed as a group that is kind of contracting out to do a very specific part of the project, usually a specific task, right? Like you're paying them to do water quality measurements or sample gathering or something very specific. Subawardees are usually co-PIs. They're groups that are part of the team, basically. They're helping with the decision making. And usually there's multiple line items. It's not like a set fee. They have personnel costs, fringe costs, supply costs, just like the awardee does. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, the difference between those two categories.
All right, Caroline, do you need a sip of water? How are we doing? I have one more, I think, but there could be more.
Yeah, we're doing
All right.
great, actually.
Great. So next question is, what are NRCS's most important priorities in ranking awards? On what basis are we making these decisions?
So there is merit criteria in the NFO. There's a whole page. The merit criteria is divided into 4 different topic areas, like innovation, project management, benefits, things like that. And so there's a full page, and that's what we use. We're very upfront about how we're ranking proposals.
Great. I've seen the EQIP eligibility question pop up several times since we first addressed it. So just do want to reiterate here that producers need to meet those first 3 EQIP eligibility criteria described in the NFO, but they do not need to be EQIP contract holders and do not need to be EQIP recipients already in order to participate. So just want to reiterate that point.
Yeah. I think also just to revisit that too, there's when you have a project, if a farmer's getting paid, he's going to have to meet those EQIP eligible requirements, but you can include farmers that aren't EQIP eligible. They just can't get paid from the project, right? So they could be invited to workshops and things like that, and maybe be part of the surveys and all things like that. But and they can be part of the non-federal part of the budget. So you just need some EQIP farmers for CIG Classic. Hopefully that doesn't confuse people more, but.
Let's see. So universities have both federal and non-federal funding. So if extension is applying to work, how do we handle this? Are they matched? Can they be in the budget?
That's a good question. So a lot of extension are paid off of federal hatch funds. And in those cases, they cannot lend their time to the non-federal part of the budget if that's where their pay is coming from. But a lot of extension employees also, write for grants and use the grant to pay their personnel costs. And if that's the case, they can, or sometimes they're paid by state funds. So if that's the case, they can either add it to the non-federal if their salary is paid from state funds, or they can add it to the, they can get paid from the federal grant if they're going to use that for their salary. So.
Great, thank you. The funding floor, is the floor the total project budget or just the federal share?
The floor is just the federal share. So we're looking for big projects.
And kind of another subaward / contracting question. If a consultant works with multiple projects, should this consultant apply for each project or should they apply with multiple projects?
Let's just say it's fine for a consultant to apply to the program and be on multiple projects. That's fine. Did I answer it? No.
Yeah, and I think part of the question, so the primary awardee is submitting the application. And
Right.
if there's a consultant who's working with multiple groups, your consulting services would be considered part of that primary awardee or primary applicant's application. So each applicant should be including you. You're not submitting something independently.
Yeah,
I think
as
that
a
was the question.
sub-awardee, you're embedded into the proposal of the primary awardee. Right. You would not, as a sub-awardee, you shouldn't be submitting anything to NRCS. Only the awardee does.
Okay. Once again, that does look like the end of the questions to me. Again, if I didn't ask your question and it's in the chat somewhere, please resubmit to bring it to the top. Or if you have additional questions, looks like we've got, oh, there we go. Can funds be used for agriculture career incentives? I might need more information on that question.
Yeah, I mean, if those people aren't already producers, I would say no, because this is not a training program. We're not interested in funding people to train other people when there's no innovation involved. There are training components to the projects when there's an innovation involved.
The follow-up is like agricultural accounting or interns.
Likely not, but I don't. You know, we have conservation finance projects, so the innovation is in the finance realm, and so that maybe in those instances it could be. But in general, you're training producers. You're not, you know, because the idea is to get more conservation on the ground. You can't use this money to train your own team. Your team should come with the skill set needed. So I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess there could be there could be a reason to train a group like that in a certain type of project, in like a conservation finance project. I would have to know more about the project idea. Okay. Well, we're amazing. We're ending early, it sounds like. So we can hang out for the last 10 minutes if anyone wants to stay on and ask questions. I think we've reached the end, Havilah.
Think so.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for taking your time. And again, feel free to reach out if you decide to apply and you have more questions. But we really appreciate you considering our NFO. So have a great day. Thank you.